welcome again to another episode of these many lectures I'm preparing for you, and in order to show you a bit more about the Peruvian culture, Latin American culture, about the syncretism, and a way also to let you know that this culture, our culture, um, can also represent very well the syncretisms that are happening around the world. So this is the way how we are living it in Peru, but also it happens in Africa, it happens in Asia. So in that way, we can see how we humans respond so similarly everywhere. Doesn't matter the color of our skin, our traditions, language, and so on. So, well, today's exhibit, today's lecture is about the Peruvian Saints, and is about the Peruvian Saints. And it is very important for me to tell you about this topic because it also shows it's like a window to the real way how we Peruvians live our religion. Like we say we are Catholic, but the way we are Catholic is not exactly the same way people from Poland would be Catholic, people from Italy would be Catholic, or from any other part in the world. And this is because the way how religion works is that you bring an idea to people, and most of the time people can accept that idea, but will also contextualize, will adapt that idea into their world, into their reality. And you know already that Peru is a country with a long history, pre-Columbian history, a history of deities that used to be so powerful, that used to shake the soil, no? Every time people misbehave, every time people were not pleasing these deities. So these deities were sometimes very evil, were not angel images, were not pure, like let's say good, no? So the pre-Hispanic societies were used to worshiping deities that were very, very similar to us humans. No? They had all the good things and bad things humans have. So when the Spanish conquistadors came to Peru, they intended to teach indigenous about these new ideas they were bringing, no? About Virgin Mary, Jesus Christ. We talked already about syncretism in another occasion. So you know already that the indigenous were starting to accept these beliefs. They were starting to swallow some of them, but in most of the times they were not getting it yet, no? And it took a long while for the indigenous to completely understand what was being Christian, what was being Catholic. So let's go now to talk about the role of the church, of the Catholic Church here in the New World. Why they were here? Uh, they justify their presence basically by giving souls of indigenous to God, right? Winning souls of indigenous to God. And if they were not making this job properly, well, that means that their presence was not required anymore. Or at least the church, the Roman Church, the Vatican, will not support the presence of the Spaniards. So it was necessary for the Spaniards to prove they were giving fruit here in the New World, right? So this is very important for you to know because we are going in the first part of this exhibit. I promise to make it short because usually I tend to go very long, but let's go to the facts only. So what I want in the first part of this exhibit, of this exposition, to tell you that these official saints of Peru, all of them live pretty much on the same period of our history. This is something never seen before in other parts of the world, and Peru has given so much fruit. Five official saints, five official by the Vatican, and all of them live on the same time. They pretty much knew each other, all of them. No? So why this was happening? And also we will see the other part, the counterpart, no? About the saints that were not proclaimed by the Vatican and most likely will never be proclaimed by the Vatican, but they were declared saints by the people. because of the effectiveness of these saints. So how come they are so effective? Because they make miracles, right? Um, well, now we are going to start to talk about the official saints of Peru. And one of the most important things that we have to talk about in this moment is that these official saints live pretty much on the same period of our history. We're talking about the final half of the 17th, the 16th century and the early 17th century. Also, a time of still conquest in Peru. Things were not solved out yet in terms of expansion of the Spaniards here in these territories. Actually, they were fighting not just to win souls to the church, also to reaffirm their presence here because they were indigenous, they were fighting against the Spaniards, trying to regain these territories to them, to the Incas, right? Also, there's one important fact about Lima because these saints that I'm going to be talking initially about, they all of them live in Lima, in the city of Lima. In the same period of the history, they even were friends, some of them, knew each other, right? So Lima has many names in its history. Lima, the city of kings, Lima, the garden city, Lima, the gray, because of the sky color, very gray, and Lima was known as the convent city in the 17th century. The reason is because in the city of Lima, in the early 17th century, there were already 40 churches. So imagine the big number of churches and monasteries at the same time in a city that had not really too many people. We know that 10% of the population of Lima between the 16th, 17th century lived in convents. So that's why Lima was known as the convent city. And this city was a melting pot of different backgrounds, different people. We had indigenous people, of course, but indigenous people were segregated into reducciones, which in English would be something like there is a special name for this for the indigenous section. It will come in a moment to my mind. So there's a special word in English for these zones where only indigenous live. Now, in a moment, I will be recalling that name. Exactly, reservation. Thank you so much. Gracias, Michelle. Reservation. In the reservations here in Peru, or reducciones, right, were places where there was always someone in charge. Could be a religious order or could be an Spaniard, a well off, could be even conquistador or descendant of conquistador with wealth enough to pay for the religious education of the indigenous. In return, the indigenous will serve as servants, of course, or to work plus the land for this master, religious order, or a person, right? So we had indigenous. But most surprisingly, most of the people of Lima used to be black slaves. 50% of the population of Lima in the 17th century were black men. Mm? And a reduced number of people, about only 30%, were Spaniards. So we are seeing a big mix of cultures, elements, religions, traditions, languages, right? So 40 churches, convent city, 10% of the population of Lima living within the walls of monasteries. So the first person we are starting with is Santa Rosa de Lima, Saint Rose of Lima. And Saint Rose of Lima, which just a little screenshot of the name in images in Google, you can see several paintings of this beautiful saint. And I have chosen this one in particular because this one was made a few years ago from a reconstruction made from the actual skull of the saint. The skull of Saint Rose of Lima is in this moment in an altar within the Church of Saint Dominic of Lima. Actually, it's considered to be a very very special thing. Is like let's say well, there's another word I am forgetting, but basically it's very precious, and it is in the altar, and people go there to praise. And many claim that they have been saved of several diseases, and also she continues making lots of miracles. But Saint Rose of Lima, which is recalled in the history books as a beautiful woman, like physically very attractive woman, so attractive that many men try to convince her and her family to marry her, but she was since very young very given to God, and she never lived on a convent. Quite interesting thing for that time, because Saint Rose of Lima, born Isabel Flores de Oliva, that was her name, but Rose, Rosa, no, this name she now is given is because when she was born, the mother said that she looked so beautiful that she looked like a rose, right? Rose cheekbones, rose lips. So since then, she was also nicknamed Rose. So she was born in the year 1586, and she didn't live long, actually. She made it only till she was 31 years old. And the reason of her early death is because of how much she, let's say, inflicted in her body terrible, like martyrios we call it, which means constantly beating herself, constantly like deprivation of sleep, for example, not eating. She pray for hours and hours, so she sleeps just 1 or 2 hours per night. And one of the things she's remembered, for example, is that in order to not attract any men to her, one of the things she used to do was scratching in her face chili. So in order to make her like disfigure her beautiful face, but she couldn't like stop being attractive. And one of the things people say is that because it was part of the miracles made around her, God didn't want her to be ugly. And also another thing interesting about her is that she never went to a convent. She lived her entire life in the house of her parents. So how come? Well, she decided to dress up as a nun, but the way she served is, we call it in Spanish terciaria, which means a nun, declared nun, but she lived in her house, not in a monastery. And that tells a lot of the society of that time, because back then in that time, well, many women were sent to monasteries, to nunneries, not because of their conviction of being nuns, because they were forced to be nuns. And many things that were not very saint were happening within the walls of the nunneries. So she didn't want it to be contaminated by all of that, and she decided to live in isolation in her home. And uh, her house, actually, which nowadays is basically a part of a church, the Church of St. Rose of Lima. There she used to live. There used to be the house of her parents. And here we still can see the ermita, which is a very small room that was built with the help of her brother and father outside their house, so in the garden place, where she spent up to, in some cases, 23 hours praying only. And a little bed where she used to sleep, very rigid. It was a bed made of wood with no mattress. And also she used to put a stone as a, let's say, how do you call pillow, right? A pillow for resting during the time of sleep. For in that way, not sleeping too much, to feel discomfort in order to wake up earlier. So this is considered to be a very saint place, because indeed she is known as a mystic as well, no? And she had also the possibility of foretelling several things, which were visions given by God. And She was known as one of the most important personalities of her time when she was alive. When she died, it was pretty much like almost official that she would become a saint. So, what is the most important thing about Saint Rose of Lima? She is the first saint of the New World, the first saint of the Americas, and also the first female saint. Um, so things that are very important to be taken in consideration about Saint Rose of Lima. She was officially a saint. She was canonized in the year 1671. Well, next one is Santo Toribio de Mogrovejo, the second Archbishop of Peru. And Santo Toribio de Mogrovejo was born in Spain, not like in the case of St. Rose, born in Lima. So from the five Peruvian saints we have, only two of them were born in Peru, but the other three made their career here in Peru. Most of them lived most of their life here in this nation. So Santo Toribio Mogrovejo is remembered as a conciliator, as a man whom got very close with the indigenous, a man whom actually traveled a lot. He was a traveler archbishop. He walked thousands of miles, thousands of kilometers. Back in that time, that was the only way sometimes to reach out different towns in the indigenous territories. And he even learned native languages in order to get very close to the indigenous. Well, nowadays we will think that it's of course something completely normal, no, to be interested in the needs of indigenous. But back then, nobody really cared about the indigenous. So that's why he was a very, let's say, unusual man for his time, and was also proclaimed saint quite soon, actually. He was born in the year 1538 and he died in the year 1606. So we continue seeing that, well, these people met. Actually, this saint, Santo Toribio Mogrovejo, he confirmed Saint Rose of Lima. So they had a certain relation, of course, or a friendship possible. So here you can see also a painting of Santo Toribio in which you can see the confirmation of Saint Rose of Lima. And this is an altar, just a little parenthesis, located in the Cathedral of Lima. Sorry, this is the one of the monastery of Saint Dominic. Why is so important? This one, let me make a close up. Okay, can you see the skull? Let me put. I'm marking it here, and also I'm marking other one here. There are two skulls. So these are the skulls of Saint Rose of Lima and Saint Martin of Porres. And the word I was trying to find is relics. Relics. They are relics, right? Because the bones of saints have that status. But in many parts of Europe, they are not exhibited anymore. Here in Peru, they are very important and most likely will never be buried. So this is the altar of the Peruvian Saints located in the Church of the Dominicans. And we can see here three saints, three Dominican saints. We can see, let me mark here, we have the first black saint of America, San Martin of Porres. I will be talking about him in a little while. Saint Rose of Lima, Peruvian, as you know, as well as San Martin of Porres, and San Juan Macias. He was Spanish, but he made his career here. In the case of San Juan Macias, here in this coffin are the bones of the saint. So we will continue now. And another little close-up of the same altar. As you can see, the skulls clearly visible. And this is the one of the Cathedral of Lima. So in these two churches, we have altars dedicated to the Peruvian saints. There is one more saint that you can see here besides San Juan Macias and Rose of Lima and San Martin of Porres. This person in the upper part is Saint Francis Solano, a Franciscan saint. Okay, so let's continue with Saint Martin of Porres. Honestly, my favorite saint, and the reason is because he was such a humble person. He is known as one of the most important personalities of his time, also as a conciliator. He is known nowadays as the saint conciliator. If you have a legal fight, a dispute with a relative, with someone that is very close to you, and you want to solve it out, so you have to pray to this saint. This saint also is known, as I said before, as the first black saint of America. What an important thing, because when he became a saint officially, it felt for many people that the African Peruvian, we would say African American in general, right, were finally accepted, no, especially the African American, the Latino American, into the church per se, right? Also, something really interesting about this saint, he made lots of miracles, and many of these miracles he made when he was alive, right? So, and the ones that were witnesses were his friends of the monastery or the monks. But the reason why this saint is so peculiar is because number one, he was mulatto, he was black, right? He was illegitimate son of an Spanish man and a Liberta black woman. Liberta was a freed slave, right? She was originally from Panama. He was born here in Lima, but in his condition of, poor man, being black, being illegitimate, he couldn't imagine to become a, for example, priest. He couldn't. Like, he was denied to that, especially because of his skin color, honestly, back then. So he had no problem with this since he was very young. He wanted to serve God, and he entered into the monastery of the Dominicans as a donated man. So donado in Spanish, and donado means someone that gives himself because he has nothing else to give. So he entered into the monastery, and his job was taking care of the nursery. He eventually learned to read and write, which was something like, let's say, quite educated. I mean, educated for that time. He was also a healer. He used herbs to heal people. He healed black people, indigenous people, but he eventually even was able to be friends of the viceroy and important people of that time because he was very wise. He was seen levitating, bilocating, and also doing things that back then were considered to be like impossible. Like, for example, washing a piece of bread that was dark to convert it into a white one just because of obedience. He mistaken what he had to buy. By mistake, he bought a darker bread. So when he was asked to return that, he didn't want it to, like make a problem of this to the person that already sold this bread. So he went to the fountain of the monastery and he washed the bread and converted it into white. But also the most famous of his miracles was making eat from the same plate a dog, a cat, and a mouse, which is what you can see here. That's why he's known as the Saint of the Conciliation. So St. Martin of Porres was born in the year 1579 and died in the year 1639. So he was also, so far we know, friend of St. Rose of Lima, and he was confirmed by also our saints, Santo Toribio de Mogrovejo. So this is a recreation, a reconstruction of his face by the same team that did to the skull of St. Rose of Lima, and this is possibly the way how he looked. We have another saint. We are in the last part of the official saints of Peru, and the saint we are seeing here is Saint Francis Solano. This is a very peculiar painting of him. It exists, this painting, in the monastery of the Franciscans in the downtown of Lima, and it's a post-mortem painting. And you can recognize a post-mortem painting when the hands are across the chest, like in this fashion, in this way. So San Francisco Solano was born in Spain. And something interesting about him is that he was a missioner. No? So his intention was not living in the big city of Lima. He came to the Americas to go to win souls, no, to the church. And he made many miracles. One of the ones that I remember, for example, is that the ship that was bringing him to Lima was about to sink. And people were desperate. There were hundreds of people on the ship. So he started to pray, and he said to everybody to calm down, because nobody will be killed by this situation. I am praying for you all. Please go one by one, and I will be the last one that will leave the ship. And it happened the same what he said. Everybody left the boat, and the minute he stepped off the ship, this one sank. So this is known as his miracle, one of the many miracles he had, prodigies that happened back then. And also he's remembered as the saint of the Ravel. Ravel is an old type of violin. And he used to use the Ravel, the violin, to call the attention of big multitudes. Back then, the most conservative Franciscans didn't like that, no, like they despised music, no, but he loved music. He had a very beautiful voice, and he used this to call the attention of indigenous and black people especially. And he had also big, let's say, reunions, no, with several people. This is also another painting that recalls him preaching the gospel to many people of all classes, of all social classes of Lima. So San Francisco Solano was born in Spain in 1549 and died in Lima in 1610. His body is in the monastery of the Franciscans. And finally, San Juan Macias, the last one of the group of official Peruvian saints, born in Spain, also very good friend of San Martin of Porres. He was also Dominican, and he was also seen levitating and bilocating. He is known as the thief of souls. You can even see ladrón de almas in the bottom part of the picture. This is also another recreation used or made from the skull of this man by the same team, a team of archaeology, Brazilian forensic archaeologists that visited the monastery about 10 years ago. So, and now we are going to continue with the non-official. So let's make something very, very clear. Most of these saints that are non-official will never be saints, never ever. And one of the most important reasons is because there are not enough proofs of their sanctity. They are not even proofs enough of, well, the faith they had. No? Some of them were maybe Catholics, but not exactly Catholics. Some of them were not even Catholics, or if they were Catholics, were just by tradition. Oh, but in their way, they were good people. In their way, they made a lot of good to some people when they were alive, and that's why they were proclaimed saints by the people. So the first person we are going to talk about is Sarita Colonia. So Sarita Colonia, which you can see, oh, sorry, this says the 10 minutes left. Sarita Colonia is the person you see in this image. This is a picture from a Twitter. And Sarita Colonia died because of typhus or typhus, a disease in the lungs. She was very young. She was not from Lima. She was born in the year 1914 and died in the year 1940. So she was young. She was maid. She used to sell fish in the market. Nothing really in particular. She represents the common Peruvian, the common, not just Peruvian, the common migrant to the big city, that had to suffer, that had to deal with many things, with lots of discrimination. So, well, the story about Sarita Colonia, actually, she lived in Callao, in a zone that is very, very poor nowadays. So she died from this disease, and she was a very good person when she was alive. She helped many, many people. So people that were friends of her started to pray to her as a mediator for things that they were needing, right? And which ones were the friends of Sarita Colonia? Well, remember, she comes from Callao, a very poor zone. So, thieves, prostitutes, gays, like, and the list is very long. So, and they were given lots of miracles, and they started to pass the voice. Oh, you are having a problem? Pray to Sarita Colonia. She's going to help you. There is just one picture of Sarita Colonia, only one that the family has, and that's the same one that has been replicated in so many posters, and not just posters. Also, look at here, for example, this is is something typical among people that have committed crimes, went to jail. So in order to, let's say, be protected by Sarita Colonia, they make tattoos of her. So remember, she was not a saint woman, she was not a nun, but she was a good person, and people could relate to her, could feel like a relation with her. hmm Another person, very famous, that is known as a saint of the poor people is Chacalón. So, who is Chacalón? Also known as the angel of the poor. So, Chacalón was a man from the province. As many migrants, he came like with no money, like empty-handed, and he went to the hillsides to populate that territory. And he became a singer of a let's say of a music rhythm we call chicha, right? It's very popular in Peru. So this man made a lot of money quite soon, right? And he used to drink a lot. He had a wife. He had also many women. He was sort of like a womanizer of his time. But let's not focus in the bad things. Let's focus in the good things. He was very, very supportive with his community. He helped many children to pay their education. He also used to help the people that were very sick of diseases, like, for example, cancer or other. So he gave money cash, like, to people that were needing it. And he was not thinking in the future. He was thinking in the present. He had money in the present, and he was using that money. So, well, tragically, he died when he had 44 years old. It was in 1994, so far I remember. And he died tragically. Some people say it was a heart attack. Some people say it was diabetes. He didn't take care very much of himself. But when he died, multitudes of his fans went to the hills to go with the coffin to the cemetery. And something that I remember, because I was still little, but I remember the videos, is that people were cutting their arms, like dying, like of pain, of seeing him dead. Like many people cut their arms, like flagellating themselves because the angel of the hills, the angel of the poor, was dead. And they were seeing him as a father. So that is the moment when the tradition, no, this idea, no, of him as a saint started, and since then he's proclaimed the saint of the poor. Also because of his story, because he was a migrant, because he was a shoe shiner, and then he became like famous, rich at some point, and well, he died very soon. So there we have Chacalón. Chacal means jackal. Does it make sense? Like it's an animal, not jackal. And it's very funny because the jackals go around like like rotten bodies, right? And that also is related with his origin, no? Like he used to pick up like trash, recollecting plastic, so that's why his name. Also, next we are in the last part. The next one is the story, a very sad story of a child who died consequence of an earthquake in 2007. So all of these are saints sort of contemporary. And this is the story of the Niño Chicho. So who was Chicho? Well, the name of Chicho was Jose Luis Tipacti. And this child died when he was 9 years old, consequence of the earthquake, the terrible earthquake of 2007 that we had here in Peru, at earthquake of 7.4 Richter scale in the zone where he lived in Ica. And he was outside his house. He was a really good child, so far the mother remembers. So he went out of the house. The earthquake happened at 6 p.m. So he returned to his house, and in that moment where he was standing, thinking that he would be protected, he was near a wall, and that wall fell completely over him. It crushed him, right? So the child died immediately. And it was so tragic for the family, so tragic for the, well, the people around, the neighbors, no, that, well, in that moment the legend started. So when he died, no, people started, because he was, we say what they are very early, we said they are angels, right? So people started to pray, asking him an intercession, and miraculously things started to happen like very fast. People started to see miracles around the name of Chicho. So so fast the fame of these saints started, that this site you see here is basically, this is the let's say the shrine of Chicho, which we can visit also nowadays in Ica. And inside there are pictures of thousands of people that were given a miracle from Chicho, all of them. And the family nowadays don't even need to work, because people give money to the family, to the other, as a thank to Chicho. This image you see here was created to resemble Chicho when he was 9 years old. He would be now like 21 years old, right? And they dressed the image up with presents. People bring new clothes to this saint every once in a while, and he is known as one of the most famous saints of Ica. So Chicho. And there's one thing that is really funny, is that Chicho used to have marbles. You know the marbles for the little balls, right? So the mother says that many vendors that are friends of her ask her to lend them the marbles for them to have good sellings. So that's, this is like like an amulet of Chicho. Of course, they never keep it; they always return it. Oh, but this is an amulet that is known by them as a as something that brings good luck to them. A little bit more of Chicho. You can see all of the different like this little like plate silver color things are actually made on silver. These are milagros, as we call them, miracles, right? And finally, this is the last and not least of all. This is the belief, the most famous non-official belief of Cusco. See, we are closing with the province, and this is el niño compadrito. Oh, niño compadrito. Compadre, for example, well, when you get married, for example, the person that is a good friend of you, that supports you, like gives you money for your marriage, he's your compadre. I'm not sure if you have a specific word for this in English, but it's used a lot in Latin America. Compadre is someone that supports you with money when you get married, or when you have the baptize of your child. So first of all, El Niño Compadrito is basically a sort of like a mummified person. You can see that it looks pretty much like a mummy, and the tradition says that this is the skeleton of a child of approximately 14 years old, but something most likely impossible, because the figure in height is 50 centimeters. So it's too small to be an actual human, unless it's a fetus, but most likely it's not the person the tradition says it is.
And this the shrine of the saint of the compadrito is just 5 blocks away from the main square of Cusco, right? So in the face of Nino Compadrito, there is a whole meeting of Catholic religion and also indigenous faith. And to go to this place is not so difficult. Actually, the person that takes care of the image is very welcoming to anyone that wants to come in. But when you get into that site and you see this creepy image, well, the first thing that comes to your mind is this is not really what usually a saint would look like. But the people that worship Compadrito says that he's the most beautiful thing. They always praise about the eyes of the saint, which actually are marble, like marbles, like in blue color. He always has this very long like hair, which is a wig, and is dressed up as baby Jesus will be represented, right? So most of the clothing this Niño Compadre has are offerings, are presents from the many people that are giving miracles from the saint. And it's pretty much the same like the Niño Chicho, right? Like in the shrine, which is a house, there are lots of images of like pictures or, for example, driver's license or diplomas of becoming doctor, for example, and whatsoever, something that you ask to the Niño Compadre that you were able to accomplish. So you have to be a witness also of this, and you have to let that there. But one of the things that is completely out of discussion that it's no Catholic at all is, for example, that when you go to that place, you have to bring candles, and according to the color of the candle is what you are asking to the Niño Compadre. Until some few years ago, one of the colors of candle you could bring was black, and black means to do something good to someone, something bad to someone, something that was related with, for example, returning bad to someone. So as a protection, like a mirror, no? So to return bad eye, to return bad desires, right? So the family that takes care of Niño Compadre nowadays don't permit that candle because they don't want people to think that this is a tradition that is not, let's say, like good. And they even ask the church to permit this saint to be elevated to the altars. So what happens with this? Well, this is a piece of writing from El Comercio, which is a very famous, renowned Peruvian newspaper. And in one part dedicated to the tradition of Niño Compadre, it says that, well, several years ago, around the so far I remember the 1970s in the whole story, one of the archbishops of Cusco was completely against this saint, right? Completely against. He was very, very purist, very traditional, and he was not interested in permitting this continue. So he decided to ban the Niño Compadrito. So what happens is that this person had an awful accident on the roads, this archbishop. And the story says also that possibly it was because he opposed to Niño Compadre, and Niño Compadre killed him, right? So, and what is the position of the new, or the one that was after the archbishop that was after this one? Well, he continued opposing, but he didn't like impose, removing the image, right? So there was also a feeling of certain fear against what could happen at some point, no? So this is also part of the story, and people believe that you should not go against, well, the Niño Compadre. And this also recalls to me a lot, for example, the tradition in Pachacamac, about, for example, the god of the earthquakes, no? The bad thing that could happen to you if you misbehave if you don't respect the God, so the God can destroy you. And these are elements that still exist, and they are considered part of life, and also they are now part of the temper, the mood of some of our saints. So, well, with this lecture today, I just want to give you an idea of the official and non-official, and also the things that the way we practice our religion. Sometimes we practice a form of religion to the world, like we try to maintain certain like postures and certain forms, but within the closed doors, we can do some other things, right? We are permitted to do some other things, and this is what happens, behind the closed doors. So, well, I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Once again, it took me longer than I wanted to, but I hope you enjoy it. It was entertaining to you, and you were able to learn
Wonderful.
something.
Thank you.
Oh, gracias. Thank you so much.